I studied medicine because I was born in Iran, and my family left Iran. We all left together during the time of the revolution in 1979. We lived in France for a while, and we left and worked and lived in the United States subsequently. At the time growing up, it was very difficult to see. My father was a lawyer. He was very prominent in his field. And he lost his identity to some extent when he left his job in Iran. And he struggled to recover sort of that identity, the connection with society and the role he had. And at the time, it seemed to me that the people who struggled the least in terms of recovering their identity in the moment of crisis and change were the physicians, who had a set of skills that were appreciated and necessary across different societies. They were easily transferable from culture to different positions, and were able to reintegrate work life and balance their families very easily when they came abroad. And so that was a prime motivating factor at the time for me to become a physician. And I'd also noticed that they had great satisfaction in the work that they were doing. Physicians played a major role in my family in the sense that my father was also very sick, and he really had many contacts with different doctors, and they're the ones who really helped him stay alive for many, many years. So it was a complex set of decisions, but at the end of the day, there was some pragmatic consideration, but at the same time also seeing what an important role a physician can have in changing the life of a person and a family that made me decide to go into medicine. There were entirely different set of decisions that came in my choice to become a physician scientist and pursue biomedical research as my primary activity in biomedical sciences. And this was really governed later on after I finished medical school and actually finished my internal medicine training. That's when I realized that we are treating patients the same way, using the same algorithms, yet each one of them has a unique set of problems, even though we call them having diabetes, high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, coronary heart disease. They each had their own unique set of problems, their own unique presentation and response to therapy. And at the time, it seemed that in clinical medicine, if I just practice that from day to day, I'm going to be solving the same problems over and over again. And so there must be ways of trying to innovate and try to do better. And so that was the decision to go into biomedical research after residency, actually.
Do you still see patients from time to time?
Yes, I see patients. In the American system, clinician scientists have devoted blocks of time during the year. So I typically do 1 month of general internal medicine in the inpatient service and 1 month of nephrology service. And what's really interesting is that now, because of my research, for the first time, I actually have an outpatient clinic as well for patients for hereditary kidney diseases, because we are now, through our research, making clinical diagnoses that are important for the patient's health. And so as a result, now I see these patients again as their doctor in the clinic.
You like the patient-physician relationship?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. It's among the most rewarding relationships one can have professionally. And in fact, I always feel energized after a month of general medicine service. I'm much more enthusiastic, energetic. It really centers you. It's a privilege to take care of people. Our patients come to us in a moment of crisis in their lives, and they're looking for us to find solutions for them to bring them back to who they were before. We see patients, but we see them as patients sometimes, but in fact they're individuals with lives, with families. And so the job of the physician and the privileged position that we have is to help them go back to where they were, so they don't have to worry about illness and all these other things anymore in their lives. And so it's a wonderful experience to be a doctor, to take care of people and help somebody. And usually being a doctor, you help at least one person each day when you practice medicine. And I don't think there are many professions that have this type of reward in their daily activity.
You would choose medicine and nephrology again today?
Yeah, I think I would definitely choose medicine and nephrology again. I would probably start doing science earlier in my career, so I can be. There were a number of hurdles that I had to overcome when you start to go into biomedical sciences at an older age. But that's what I would do simply differently. I would definitely choose medicine because it's been so rewarding, so much fun to be in this career. Yes. Well, they were not my choosing, I would say. It was something that I experienced as a child, and so it's very different. But those have profound, impact on you as an adult, as you see, because you see that nothing can be taken for granted when you're a child, and you have a very stable life and a stable family situation, and from one day to another you have to pack everything and leave. You realize that you have to appreciate the moments where you have stability, that things can change and you have to be prepared for it, and you have to be you cannot be attached to too many things. There are some important things in life, so it helps you focus on some important things that you have, your identity, your family, your friends, things that cannot be changed by these types of changes in world events. And it helps you focus your energy on some things that you feel are important, and forget about some other things that may be distractions, I would say. And that helps. It also moving from place to place helps you understand a wider number of people, which is important, in your role as a doctor, understanding different cultures. And that's a very enriching experience. And to me, that's been a wonderful, wonderful experience to go to school in all these different countries and get to know the culture of each of these countries in a firsthand, so to speak. So it's I wish, more children and people would be able to have this experience of living in different places. I think it really would help in terms of better understanding among different individuals. Absolutely. So you cannot overstate the importance of having good mentors. I think that you have to pick good mentors, and mentors have to pick you. But and it's important to have multiple mentors to learn from different people. Not every individual is perfect, and there are many different people who have different set of skills, different types of wisdom to impart to, and particularly at different stages of your life. So I was very lucky when I started doing biomedical research. I was finishing my residency at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. I met this incredible cardiologist called Robert Phillips, who was a clinical investigator doing clinical trials, and he took me on as a trainee, as a fellow, and taught me what he knew, and actually in terms of the clinical trials. And that's when I started really getting engaged with patient-oriented research. But he noticed that I had an interest in genetics. He was not an expert in genetics, but he encouraged me to start working towards enlarging my knowledge of genetics, to collaborate with other people at Mount Sinai who were working on genetics projects. And he gave me the freedom to explore and not just follow his ideas and his own path. And supported me for a number of years, even after I had left his group. He actually found funding for me to continue my biomedical research in other ways. And what I really appreciated about Robert was his generosity, his freedom of spirit, and his increasing, encouragement throughout the years. I still speak to him regularly. He is now running a big hospital in Houston. Houston Methodist. He's the chief medical officer there, and we could talk, frequently about various things. And whenever I have a question, I still rely on him. What was also very important about Robert is that he was very open with me. Whenever he had a problem that he was facing, he openly discussed this with me as he was running through it and trying to solve it. And so I learned a lot through that process as well, because if your mentors only talk to you when things are perfect and don't discuss any of the problems and struggles they have, you don't see the other side of things. And Robert was very open about it, and I thought that I learned quite a bit from him at the time. And then subsequently, the other critical person in my career development was Paul Klotman, who around the same time joined the Mount Sinai Medical Center as the chief of nephrology. And he joined from the NIH. At the time, nephrology was a sort of a dormant subspecialty, I would say, at Mount Sinai. It was not one of the most popular subspecialties. And actually, I had considered going to nephrology when I was in medical school, but then because, nephrology was not taught and encouraged in the same way, we didn't have the same role models as I did in medical school, I started hesitating about that specialty. And so that's why I wound up working with Robert, who was a cardiologist at the time. So when Paul Klotman came and took over as the division chief at Mount Sinai, it completely reinvigorated the division. Paul was a clinician scientist. He was interested in HIV nephropathy, but he interested in biomedical research and developing physician scientists foremost. And he brought a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, great organizational skills. He was great at recruiting people to come to work with him, for him. He built the program, recruited people from the outside, and really transformed the place in a matter of a year or two, where we went from a nephrology division that was sort of, very clinical and sort of inactive in a way to a very prominent division nationally, actually. He also was very good about inviting a lot of national speakers to come to the division to talk to us, and so that also increased our exposure to high-level biomedical science all over the country. And Paul recruited me as one of the first renal fellows in his new program, and I was very happy to do this. And he's the one who actually saw that I was interested in human genetics research and said, we don't have enough capability to train people at Mount Sinai right now for human genetics and the type of genetics work that you want to do and you are capable of doing. And so that was very important because he saw in me a potential. And he also recognized that there were the limitations of his program for realizing that potential. And he says, you need to go to Yale University and train with Richard Lifton, who was emerging as the leading human geneticist in nephrology. And Paul arranged for me to go for Rick Lifton's lab. He actually paid for me to go to Rick Lifton's lab. While I still had an appointment at Mount Sinai, I was spending 10, 12 months out of the year at Yale University. And the first couple of years, Paul paid for me. Subsequently, I arranged to have NIH funding. And so this was an incredible, generous gift that he gave me in terms of enabling me to go completely, while still in his division, to work completely independently or separately at Yale University with Rick Lifton, who then became the other very major influence in my life in terms of sort of what I learned about human genetics. I learned from Rick, who is a unbelievably talented human geneticist, arguably the best human geneticist that we have right now in the country, in the United States, perhaps in the world. He is very smart, very talented, knows how to pick a problem and how to solve it. He has the highest standards in terms of biomedical sciences, a very rigorous scientist, critical thinker, and all of that he imparted to all of us in his laboratory. And that's how I got started in biomedical research and the work that I do now. And the other thing that I would say in terms of, again, the freedom and generosity and the support that they said was a critical thing that Rick told me when I first joined his lab. That was back in, that's 20 years ago. I saw him, he's a busy person, so it took a while for me to have a one-on-one with him to say, Dr. Lifton, I just joined your lab, what should I work on? And he said, why don't you take some time off and start reading and thinking about important problems to solve. And I think and that's what you should work on. And he gave me the freedom to pick a problem, but also just said, pick an important problem to work on. And so it's during that time that I started spending a month in the library at Yale University trying to read basic textbooks and literature. And I realized that there are two broad fields that I just didn't understand in the field of nephrology. One was immune-mediated diseases, glomerulonephritis, and the other one were developmental disorders. And during that period of time, I realized that the reason why I struggled with these two themes, these two issues in nephrology, was that essentially we didn't have enough information about these areas. And in fact, most people don't understand much about these disorders. And so that seemed to be a real opportunity for making progress. And that's when I decided to work on IgA nephropathy and developmental disorders of the kidney, which are the main themes in my laboratory still today. And now administration, because I'm the director of the renal division at Columbia. So those are the three, major responsibilities that I have. Yes. Yeah, I think, I went to medical school, and so I'm a doctor first and a scientist second, in a way. They're inextricably linked, but it's important that the problems that I want to solve are anchored in clinical problems. That's the motivation for doing the biomedical research, and that's what anchors the entire research program. So they're linked. Everything that we think about on a day-to-day basis in terms of solving a problem in the lab is the clinical problem that we're trying to solve at the end of the day, and hopefully that's we're trying to help somebody going forward. So. That's what I try to explain to each one of the trainees, is that the reason why we're here is because we want to help somebody who has a problem. And hopefully the work that we do in the lab, all the frustrations that we experience are meant or necessary or have value, because at some point we're going to hopefully help somebody through it. So I think it's important to have, clinical activity and still be engaged with patients, because having that separation sometimes makes you forget. You get busy, you get frustrated by the day-to-day activities in the laboratories. The failures, which are many, can get you discouraged. But when you go back and see patients, you realize why you're doing this in the first place, and it makes it all worthwhile at the end of the day. And that's the reason why I think it's important to do both things, even though it's difficult to balance things right and, not fall behind on one or the other. I'm actually very worried about this as well. I think nephrologists have a unique perspective and a set of skills to bring to bear to patient care. So I think that's I don't agree with it, but I think it's one of those conclusions that you can be made if you're looking at administrators, looking at it from higher up. Why should we pay more for a nephrologist when an internist can take care of all of these things? It's chronic kidney disease. You manage them with blood pressure, treatment, and if they have kidney failure, you refer them for dialysis and transplantation, and that's it. And maybe you only need a transplant nephrologist, and that's it. Okay. So I'm really, saddened by this turn of events. But I think there are a lot of things we can do to roll this back. We can reclaim a number of these different specialties and areas of expertise where we were the leaders. And I think, over 25 years ago, nephrologists were viewed as the thought leaders, as the intellectuals in internal medicine. We made the greatest advances in understanding renal physiology, and so all of our papers came out in the most prominent journals in the biomedical sciences, and we haven't had those advances. I'm hoping that in some ways, some of the things that we're doing now with genomics and will help change some of these things, because it's very clear that through genomic diagnostics, we can identify the cause of kidney disease in maybe 10%, 15% of patients. If you have a molecular diagnosis, now you start to think about molecular pathogenesis, you start to think about biological pathways, you start to think about potential targeting of therapy that's individualized to the person. So then you go back to the person in front of you, to a different set of disorders that are in front of you. You start to think about complications that may result as a cause of this particular biological disturbance in the individual in front of you, as opposed to lumping everybody together and viewing them as an epidemiological cohort. So that might be one. We should also think about innovation in terms of therapy, in terms of diagnostic tools, imaging tools, and so forth, which will help reinvigorate nephrology. I think that's going to be essential to do this, and that's what we're trying to do. In my training program, what I try to do now is to combine nephrology with other types of specialty training as well, so people can learn more. So we have an interventional nephrology program, we have a transplantation program, we have a glomerular disease program, we have a ICU critical care program that we're developing, and we hope to be also combine this with palliative care as well, which is another side of nephrology. As people are getting older, they develop kidney failure. Should you not initiate them on dialysis? And nephrologists are very much involved in end-of-life decision-making for patients and families. And so it would be appropriate that a subset of nephrologists will develop this additional expertise in palliative care. And there are a number of people who are really interested in this, it turns out, every year.
Overall, you're optimist.
You have to be optimistic. I think in whatever, as a doctor, you have to be an optimist. I think it's very important for you because you face difficult problems, you have to solve difficult problems, and you have to provide that optimism to your patients who come to you with a difficult issue, and they need somebody who's enthusiastic, who's going to advocate for them. And it's the same thing with biomedical research. You have to be optimistic about it otherwise, because I would say if you're doing things right and you're asking the right questions, you're going to have experiments that are failures 95 to 99% of the time. So you have to be optimistic. I think that nephrology is on the cusp of a transformation where we're going to understand molecular pathogenesis a lot better in the next decade. And as a result of this, there is going to be more therapies that are going to be available for our patients. And I think not just because of optimism, but also because of the data that's out there in terms of what you could see is, as I mentioned, in terms of genetics, we're able to identify the genetic basis of disease in a large number of these disorders. And it turns out that nephrology turns out to be a bit of an exception in other fields where there seems to be a large burden of genetic diseases in our patient cares, in our patients, and as a result of this, then we're going to be able to identify the molecular basis and hopefully come up with therapy for some patients. The second reason is that also even for some complex diseases that we've had, such as membranous nephropathy, such as focal segmental glomerulosclerosis in African Americans, there seems to be a common genetic variant that has an incredibly large effect and can really determine the disease and help point the way to a molecular pathogenesis. I'm thinking about APOL1 mutations predisposing to focal segmental glomerulosclerosis in African Americans. That's an unbelievable discovery that Martin Pollack has made in our field, and will drive a lot of research. And this is going to be an unbelievable target for us to go after and try to impact a huge number of people, not just in African Americans in America, but also a lot of Afro-Caribbeans who also have kidney failure as a result of this, and the African population, which probably has a silent epidemic of kidney failure because they're not being diagnosed appropriately. I'm talking about membranous nephropathy, where we have two risk alleles in the immune system, HLA, in the HLA system, and in the PLA2R, which determines the risk of disease, and there's the odds ratio for having membranous nephropathy is about 90 if you have two risk alleles at each one of these. So that's pointed the way to pathophysiology, and these are supposed to be complex traits. It turns out they have, relatively simple molecular or genetic pathogenesis. There are a lot of data about biomarkers that are out there now, and they're being developed, investigated very carefully, and I think that's also really important for trying to risk stratify our patients so we can move beyond simply having serum creatinine and urine protein as our measurement. And in general, I see that now by the biomedical, so the biotechnology and the pharmaceutical industry has now recognized kidney disease as a missed opportunity, and now they are investing in the, treatment, diagnosis and treatment of kidney diseases. and they're willing to engage in partnership with academic groups to be able to move the field forward. So I think that's a good combination of circumstances, and because of the advances that we have in a number of our technological tools, we should be able to do a lot better with nephrology in terms of diagnosis and therapy in the years to come. I would tell them that if you're interested in having a life which is very rich, where you find a type of on a day-to-day meaning, day-to-day you have satisfaction, and you're interested in having some reward and helping people, that's still the one field that you can go to where you can have a huge impact. You can have and help somebody on a daily basis, no matter what type of day you have. There's still in medicine, there's a lot of autonomy in what we do, even if we are working for large organizations. Still doctors have the freedom to treat their patients the way they think is most appropriate, and make that personal connection, this individual connection, which I think is incredibly enriching on a day-to-day basis. It's a source of can be a source of frustration, but it can also be a great source of joy and satisfaction. And so I think that's really important to a young person to tell them. And certainly that's the kind of position or a type of profession where you can imagine yourself getting up every morning to try to rush to work, whereas I can't imagine myself rushing to work to go to a meeting or to ask to sit in front of the computer for the long term. So that's I think very important. The other thing is that I say we're on the cusp of transformative changes in medicine, and not just in nephrology, but across medicine in general. Whether you're looking at large data that's going to permeate and inform the way we're going to, understand and treat our patients, the biomedical fundamental insight that we're going to have into disease, which are going to give us a lot of tools to be able to treat our patients. In terms of surgical techniques, imaging techniques, I mean, this is a really exciting area. So I think that's going to be a fun place to be in years to come. So what I see is very often people who have decided to come into other fields, they decide to become a lawyer, they've decided to become go into a business. They enjoy what they do, they're happy, but they're always struggling still to find meaning in what they do. And I think that's something that the doctors never have to struggle with. If they get up in the morning, they're showing to work, well, it's for a reason. They're trying to help somebody who has a problem, and they have a set of tools and knowledge that they can help somebody with. So it really helps to also with context in your life. So that's what I would say to a young person.
I guess that he or she would say, okay, they did the right choice.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great choice. I love reading. I play tennis, so that's one of my favorite, side activities. So, in fact, everywhere I go, I try to find a place, the court to play tennis in, and I try to, sample the local food. That's one of my major, my major activities. I actually really enjoy reading about history, and ancient history, Roman history is one of my favorite topics, in fact. So, but those are the things that I do. I don't have a lot of different things that I enjoy doing. I just focus a lot on work, on exercise, and on reading. And my life is pretty simple. Well, I think there's poetry in being alive in general. So in the poetry comes from those moments. For me, it's those moments where you're sitting with somebody and you make a connection with them, one way or the other, because of their, in medicine, through because you help them gain insight, or you've gained insight into them, and you've solved a problem for them as a result of this. Whether it's somebody who's finally realized that quitting smoking is going to be really important to the next step in their health, whether it's from a family coming together because they were struggling to deal with an illness, and so somehow they've figured out that this is what they need to do to be around this person to help them get through this illness. It comes in the laboratory when we've made a discovery, and particularly a young person making a discovery that I always tell them, if they've noted, even if it's something simple, where they've validated something, I tell the young person, you're the first person in the world to have discovered this or found this. And so having that insight for the first time, that joy of discovery, is something that we go also after in the laboratory, which is really important. It happens, it doesn't have to be a world, a Nobel Prize winning discovery. It can be tiny, small, gains of insight. And that joy belongs to the young person in the lab who's made that first observation. It's not mine. It's my, they work in my laboratory, but the joy of discovery is theirs. Oh, I think that, I think you have to, if you're, when you're young, it's an incredible asset and tool that you have at your disposal. And you have to use all that energy to be able to be curious about the world you're in. And try to think about how you're going to use your tools, your energy, your talent to solve a problem. Solve problems in the world. And I think that's what we're here for. And that's what we should try to target our energies and our life to. So think about, very early on, think about how you're going to make an impact on the world. Be ambitious from the very beginning. Many people say, well, I can't make a big difference. If you pick a problem, pick a large problem, don't be afraid to fail. And just go with it. I think that the other thing that I see very often is young people don't think large enough and maybe too afraid to fail. I think failure is actually a part of success. If you look at people who have been very successful, they failed many, many, many times before they became successful. And so it's by trying to make a difference that you then, you fail again, you pick yourself up, and you finally you become a huge success. It's very rare that somebody comes up with a perfect story and a Nobel Prize winning discovery the first time they put pen to paper and start thinking about the problem. So that's what I would say. Okay, thank you. This was fun.